So I did kind of switch up the message title. The last number of messages have been titled Freedom Through the Wilderness. We've been focusing on the story of the Exodus, and I am actually still going to be reflecting on the story of the Exodus because I think even today, in so many ways, it really is still our story. I think there are so many good truths, so many good nuggets that we can take out of the Exodus. The story of the people in slavery, coming out of slavery, it is still the story of humanity. And I was just blown away by the Bible this week because just when you kind of think you've nailed down some of the major themes of the Bible, it seems like almost every theme in the Bible is a major theme, and it repeats over and over and over again. And I think one of the themes, again, that really jumped out at me this week, and I do think it was God speaking because it was something that was highlighted in what God spoke to various people this morning, is God's desire to draw close to us. And how we might not always recognize it, but behind the scenes, God is trying to draw close to us. He's trying to come near. He's trying to reveal himself to us. And that theme is repeated over and over and over and over again in the scriptures and in our big story. And it's a big part of this story of the Exodus that we can connect with. Part of our story, these, sometimes feeling lost. We sometimes feel oppression like they did. Sometimes we don't feel seen or heard like Joy shared. She was in this place and was not acknowledged. We occasionally have encounters like that. And sometimes in the situations we find ourselves in, just like the Israelites in Egypt, we are looking for rescue. We need a bit of rescue. And in many ways, we also are looking for our true home. Just as we're jumping into this thing, I did want to kind of open it up to you guys. I'm trying not to, we haven't had the time to read through the whole story from beginning to end. I guess you could go home and watch Charlton Heston and the Ten Commandments, or you could try actually reading a paper Bible. If you really want to do it on your phone. But how well do you guys remember the story? Like, what details can you remember? Just shout out some highlights. The Exodus. How does the story start? And the whole rescue and where he takes them. Like, what are the parts of the story that jump out at you, that stick out to you? Slaves in Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt. 10 plagues. The plagues is a big one. Pretty dramatic. What's that? I still missed it. The burning bush that gets Moses' attention. Yes, indeed. What's that, Dan? Moses being called is a big one. The imperfect leader. He is an imperfect leader. What about after the official Exodus, like as God is rescuing the people? What are some of the big parts of the story that stick out for you there? Parting the Red Sea. Yes, a lot of grumbling and complaining. Yeah, a lot of the things that they saw and experienced, and they still wrestled with faith. Manna from heaven. That's a good one. Yeah, it's 1 year, and it was a few years ago, but I made the connection that I think manna is lembas bread. So, I don't know. Restoration of Aaron. Yeah, the golden calf, the high priest, and that was kind of a big faux pas, but it didn't disqualify him, but a tricky part of the story. Yeah, Moses having to wear a veil, being so close to God's presence. There's a whole lot of dynamic stuff in that story. They had a lot of victories, but they also had a lot of defeats. And despite the victories, they did wrestle with faith and belief and expectations. One of the parts of the story that again sticks out for people, at times a big one. We did talk about this. This was mentioned. The good old, well, I shouldn't call him good because he wasn't good, but the golden calf. You know, what was that about? When you think about this part of the story, what does it sort of communicate to you or speak to you? This one's a little bit tricky because, again, sometimes the story, again, it happens in specific cultures and it happens at specific times. And I think a golden calf 4,000, 5,000 years ago probably communicated something a whole lot different than a golden calf would today. I think often we maybe have a hard time relating to this because has anyone actually bowed down and worshipped a golden calf? Anyone? Phew. Okay, nobody. Have you even seen one in person? No, like it's, you know, and we don't typically deal with stuff like this and idols and whatnot, so we don't totally have a grid for it. And honestly, when I read this part of the story, I have always found it extremely easy to judge them for that one. I'm like, oh, you silly people. You know, God just did all these amazing miracles. He just rescued you from slavery in dramatic style. 10 plagues, parting the sea, you know, and you're getting all these miracles, this cloud that's leading you by day and a pillar of fire by night, like God's presence is with you. How could you guys do this? Like, how silly that almost at the flick of a switch, you're turning to worship this golden idol after everything God did for you. How fickle. I would never do that. I say with false pride, I would never do that. And I think if you ever catch yourself saying that, I would never do that. You know, I think you should embrace the words of this modern day prophet, Ice Cube. You better check yourself before you wreck yourself. Because, you know, when we say like, oh, I would never do that, I think you're in danger of doing that very same thing, potentially. I think, you know, part of the problem for us as human beings, and I do say human beings because I think it is a universal problem, I think we have a tendency to judge others by their actions, but in grace, we judge ourselves by our intentions. We see what somebody else has done, and we're like, oh, bad, bad, bad. I would never do that. And if I did, I kind of did it by accident. I didn't really mean to do it. We have grace for ourselves, but we find it pretty easy to judge others. And I think, you know, maybe it should be the other way around. Maybe we should be a little more, pay attention to our actions and extend grace to other people and consider their intentions. But anyhow, what I want to consider this morning, I'm going to give you a minute to think about this, to try and put it in context, thinking about what the golden calf, what you think it meant, what it could mean. When was the last time in your life that you tried to find comfort in a golden calf? Think on it. Like that question at first might seem a little ridiculous. Me? I've never bowed down to an idol. I've never worshipped a golden calf. But see if you can come up with something. See if an idea pops into your head, pops into your heart. Yeah, and I think, you know, David just highlighted something that I think is very significant, what the golden calf kind of represents. You know, it's not just an idol. The people were reaching for something. They were in a time of uncertainty. And in that uncertainty and mass uncertainty, they were in a big crowd. They rallied around something, a thing. They were trying to reach for something. Now, here's another question for you guys. Does anybody here want to admit to being sentimental? Who are the sentimental sops in our midst? Kelly, I think, just pointed at Peter. Were you? Oh, I thought you were throwing Peter under the bus. It would have been fun. You can throw Peter into the bus. It's okay. Brandy is sentimental. Anyone else? Jackson, Joy. I'm sentimental. Laurel. Harry? Is Harry sentimental too? What does something come to mind when you think about your sentimentality? Is there one item that maybe you're most sentimental about? Family? Yeah, thinking on being sentimental. I'm actually going to show you one here a little bit later, but it got me thinking about my family and remembering days gone by, and I started looking at some of our old family photos, and oh my gosh, I was looking at a bunch of baby pictures, and that made me pretty sentimental. Those days seem kind of far away. But the thing with being sentimental, there's something behind it. We hang on to things because for us, they have special meaning. They bring comfort, and you know, for some people maybe it's like an old t-shirt, a favorite t-shirt from whatever it's full of holes but you can't bring yourself to get rid of it. Or again, from childhood, maybe a stuffed animal or a blanket. You just can't get rid of them, and they have comfort. Sometimes we can feel connected to certain moments from our past through these things. Like it can be attached to a special memory, and you don't want to get rid of that thing because it seems to be a tangible representation of that memory. And in a certain way, I think these things can connect us to those times of comfort, and in a way, they can kind of bring that comfort forward into the present. It actually reminded me of communion, and I want to try and finish today with us partaking of communion. Communion is this physical representation, this thing that reminds us of a past reality that as we practice it, it brings into the present that promise in a tangible way. Now, let's step back into the Exodus story. Now, when the Israelites left Egypt, they really didn't have time to hire moving trucks. They had to leave quick. So pretty much everything that they could take with them, it was stuff they carried on their backs. But the one thing that they could carry a lot of, that there was no limit, was memories. For 400 years, they had lived in Egypt, and most of that time they'd been in slavery. Not all. They didn't go there originally as slaves, but for them, 400 years, that's a pretty long history. It's significant history. It was the only history that they knew, and for them, it shaped a lifetime of memories that shaped habits and patterns of life and living. That's why, shortly after their journey into the wilderness, we find them struggling with memories of the security that they had in Egypt. Like, if you find your place in a place of lack and uncertainty, well, you're going to think of the last time you didn't have that. They had a lot of memories of Egypt. They had lived in slavery, but it wasn't all bad. They had homes, they had food to eat, they had a predictable life routine. Now, having been rescued, they're not in slavery anymore. They do have some hope for this new life. They do have an idea of this far-off, distant, promised land, but that hope, it was just a glimpse, and sometimes it felt like a very far-away, distant glimpse. How many times at the end of the day, after hours of trudging through the wilderness, did they maybe sit around the campfire telling stories that started out, do you remember when? Maybe we sometimes tell those stories that, on a family reunion is that, do you remember when? Or you're trying to plan your next summer holiday and the kids start bringing up stories of past holidays. You just think of times when your kids were little, or, the great family holiday, or maybe if you've moved around a bit, you had a favorite family home that stirs memories. There's sentimental memories. Or maybe it was just some sort of life success. Are there places or events that hold significant meaning in your life? Memories that seem to call out to you. And these memories, when they're good and they're rich and they're meaningful, they can seem to draw you in. They're connected to your heart, and so they speak to your heart, and you can feel that pull. You can feel that tug in your heart. Now, for us, it's hard to put ourselves in the Israelites' shoes. It's hard for us to know what it was like trying to trust God in a literal wilderness. But I do think that their struggles have a lot to show us about our own journey. And if we're honest, I think that their ways of coping really are pretty familiar to us too. Because even for us today, and again, this part of the human condition, I think insecurity and uncertainty frustrate us. We don't like it. It's not nice. The anxious feelings that well up inside us can send us running for the comfort of old habits and ways of thinking. When you're feeling stretched beyond your limit, you want to grasp for something that feels good, something that feels familiar. Now here's another thought. Do you ever find yourselves wrestling with a sense of entitlement? I think that most of us probably do. Again, if you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling hurt, if you're feeling discouraged in some way, you might find yourself wrestling with a sense of entitlement. And I don't think this is always a totally bad thing, especially if you're already in the lineup at Timmy's and you're buying donuts for whoever to treat yourself to a special donut. I think that's okay. Every once in a while, everyone deserves a treat once in a while, but entitlement might get you into trouble if you're looking at hunting rifles at Cabela's. And I just want to clarify, these are made-up examples. They have nothing to do with me personally. Okay. But feelings of entitlement, they can whisper in our hearts, "You deserve more." And sometimes our hearts yell back, "Yeah, I do. I really deserve more. I want more." The inner working of the human heart is universal. So try to imagine that you are in a very cramped campground at the bottom of Mount Sinai, and you're there with thousands of unshowered others. Extremely cramped. And you really don't know what the heck is going on. You have a lot of unanswered questions about the future. You also have lots of recent memories of the home and security that you just left behind. The future. There's this one question that is plaguing your mind. What is going on, God? Okay, we're free. We're camped out at this place, but now what? Now what? And then Moses climbs up on a tall rock to address all the people, and you think, oh, great, awesome, this is good. This is Moses. He's our leader. Don't worry. He's going to know what to do. God speaks to him. He's going to tell us God's plan. But is that really enough to dispel all their fears? Shortly afterwards, Moses disappears up the mountain for the first time. And here's a little bit of trivia you can take away today. I actually had to look this up because it did trigger my interest. Do you guys actually know how many times Moses goes up the mountain in this Exodus story? Any guesses how many times he goes up? We've got 3. Anyone with another guess? 7? You're getting closer. It's not totally clear because in a couple of the accounts, it's not totally clear if they're referring to a separate incident or if it's the same incident that's referred to twice. But Moses could have gone up the mountain 8 times. That's a lot of times. Like off the top of my head, I thought it was 2 to 3, but 8 times. And he doesn't actually get the 10 Commandments till his 4th trip up the mountain. And that hike up the mountain, that mountain is about 7,500 feet high. And so from the bottom, it's about a 4-hour hike. So he did that 8 times. So Moses must have been a pretty fit dude. That's, you think you had to have a 4-hour hike to get to your quiet spot to meet with God. So anyhow, on his first trip up the mountain, he comes back to the people and he's got a full history. They can only remember their time of slavery. He takes them back to the beginning, reminding them of God's original design, who they were really meant to be as God's people. And he also comes back with a roadmap of how to relate to God and each other going forward. And it's called the law. These are the guidelines of how you be my people. This is how you do life together. This is how you do life with me. And at first, this is awesome because it's some answers. It's like, thanks, God. Like we're camped out here not knowing what's next. You've given us a history. This is great. That's some clarity. You've given us the law. This is awesome. This gives us some guidelines going forward. And the memories of Egypt fade as their hearts start to come alive with hope for what's ahead. But shortly after that, Moses heads up the mountain again. And this time, he's gone for a very long time. I don't know if you guys remember, but on that next trip, Moses is gone for 40 days and 40 nights. the people are left at the bottom for 40 days, not having a clue what's going on. No idea. Now, the closest example that I could think of that we might have experienced in our day and age is maybe you've had like a medical thing and you show up at the Emerge and you maybe have to wait for 3-4 hours without knowing what's going on. And how many people after 3-4 hours get so frustrated that you just go home? This is ridiculous. I'm leaving. Okay, imagine if you had to sit in Emerge for 40 days, not knowing what's going on. These people, like 40 days, the future is not clear yet, and Moses, their leader, the guy who was bringing comfort, is gone. 40 days of not having a clue what's going on, and they start to get anxious. That's understandable, I think. Their confusion starts to grow. They start wondering what's going on, and they start playing the what-if game. How many of us here play the what-if game? I hate the what-if game because it can be so discouraging. What if? What if? Don't go there. You know, we'll spiral down. But they play the what-if game. What if Moses is dead? He was our only connection to God. Or even worse, what if he gave up on us? He told us he was going up the mountain, but really he's off in Babylon partying it up. Why is God silent? Where did he go? And I do think that in some ways we can relate to that, because I think that was one of the hardest parts of COVID, was not knowing if or when it would end. You know, some restrictions would start to lift and we'd think, oh good, it's finally over. And then we'd get hit with another wave and all the restrictions would clamp down again. It's like, oh my gosh, when is this ever going to be over? We didn't know. These are human reactions, so I think we shouldn't be too quick to judge the people in the story. Can you guys think of your own personal time where you had to wait on God? You were maybe hoping that he would answer. You were hoping for some guidance. You know, what did it feel like? Did you like waiting? So I think maybe you can imagine the urgency that the Israelites must have felt as they waited day after day after day, hoping to hear something, anything from God. You know, try and imagine the restlessness that they must have experienced camping in the desert, far away from modern Egyptian conveniences and satisfactions, with little sense of when the waiting would end. They didn't know when Moses was coming back. They didn't know if he was coming back. So can we really blame them for thinking about going back to Egypt? You're stuck somewhere. You don't know the next step. You're waiting with no answer. You want to latch on to what you know. Now, we talked a little bit about sentimentality and recall your comfort blankets. These might be childhood stuffed animals. Here's my sentimental family picture, if you can see it. That is baby Josiah being cuddled by big brother Josh. And that little white stuffed rabbit was Susie. So Josh was given Susie when we lived in St. Stephen. Josh dislocated his elbow. And when we took him to the hospital for them to put it back in place, they gave him Susie. And Susie became a comfort that he carried around for a very long time. Comfort blankets, these things that we can latch on to. Psychologists actually have a name for these things. They call them transitional objects. They bring comfort. From a psychological point of view, they really do bring comfort and a measure of support. These transitional objects are things that we do find comfort in, and they allow us to transition. They allow us to step out in kind of risky things because of the comfort that they bring in. So think of that for a child meeting someone new, and they've got strength to do it because they're holding on to this comfortable stuffed animal. These transitional objects can help a child. You know, it can be threatening to move away from mama. When you're little, mama is comfort. Mama is security. She will protect you. And the first time that you have to sleep all by yourself in your big boy bed, it can be scary. But if Susie is cuddling you, you maybe have the comfort that you need to do it. They create a sense of security, and losing them can seem traumatic. And I'm going to give a little disclaimer here. This story that I'm about to recount could be completely false. I remember it like it really happened, but when I shared it with my family last night at the supper table, nobody else remembered it. They think I made it up. So maybe I made it up, but I don't care. It illustrates my point, so I'm going to tell it anyways like it really happened. So, this is what really happened. One of our boys, soothers for little kids are a big comfort. And often, if they lose the soother, it's like, oh my gosh, all hell breaks loose. Because there is tears, there is panic, there's whatever. And parents around the world feel that universal sense of anxiety when the soother's missing. It's like, oh my gosh, where is it? Sense of panic, gotta find it, need to comfort this child. Well, I remember, and I do think it was Josh, that he got to a certain age where, again, the soother was that constant comfort, but at a certain point, Josh figured he was done and just threw it in the garbage. And we noticed that it was gone. And at first, initially, because we were used to it being that steady comfort, I remember that I felt like that sense of anxiety, panic, freaking out. Oh no, this kid threw it out, it's gone, it's lost. We have to go buy a new one because he's going to start crying any second, and how are we going to calm him down? But then he didn't. Like, there's this anticipation. You're waiting for the panic to start, but it never started. It's like, oh my gosh, like, are we maybe past this? And then there's this small glimpse of hope that maybe the soother phase is over. And then you kind of don't even want to acknowledge it, because it's like, he seems to have forgotten about it. If we don't mention it, if we don't remind him, maybe he really will forget about it. Walk away slowly, like in Jurassic Park. Don't make eye contact, or else whatever, tragedy. So, and maybe you can think of an example from your own family or whatnot, like a good story of this comfort blanket thing that was lost. Well, when the Israelites left Egypt, they left behind a whole lot of what gave them security. But over time, the rescue that Moses had been such a part of, the lead role that he played in that, he had become someone that they could look to. Moses was their, probably another soother, that's not the greatest, example, but he was like their security blanket. They looked to Moses for comfort. They looked to him for encouragement. They looked to him to figure out what was going on. He was sort of a God representative. He was something physical that they could see and hear and that connected them to God. He was kind of like an Old Testament Jesus figure, God in the flesh, sort of. Moses could be heard. He could be touched. He could even be argued with. So when Moses disappeared for 40 days, so did their sense of security. And after weeks of waiting, it became too much. They go to his brother Aaron with this request. They're stressed out. They said, come on, make us some gods who can lead us. We don't know what happened to this fellow Moses who brought us here from the land of Egypt. Our security blanket is gone. We need a new one. They are starting to panic, like scared, agitated little kids who have lost their security blanket. They start grasping, and Aaron gives in. He makes the calf, but this is the interesting point. This is what, after he makes the calf, he says this. It says, Aaron, built an altar in front of the calf, and then he announced, tomorrow will be a festival to the Lord. He didn't say tomorrow will be a festival to this new God, this golden calf. He actually uses the name there, the Hebrew name for Yahweh. Tomorrow, we're going to celebrate Yahweh. We're going to celebrate our God. And we're doing it with this calf. See, the calf, it wasn't intended as idolatry. They weren't really after other gods. They weren't trying to replace God. They made something physical that they could see to represent him. Moses, their security blanket was gone. They were grasping for some sense of security, so they made a calf, something physical that they could see and touch to represent God to them. It was as if they were saying, we need something we can touch. We need something we can see. We need something tangible. And if we're honest, we've had those same feelings, that same desire to see proof. We put out fleeces all the time. God, if this is really you, then give me a sign. God, if this is really you, speak to me. God, show me. We want that comfort too. So today, in this crazy season of life in which we find ourselves, what might we be holding on to in an attempt to find comfort? Security. What might we be looking to as an answer to prayer? Instead of God himself, in our impatience, are we grasping for a substitute? I think sometimes this affects our attitude towards money. Without even realizing it, we're grasping for security. We want certainty, something tangible. We put too much emphasis on money. We stockpile groceries in our pantry. We want that security. We want certain people in our lives because they bring us security. We latch onto things. We grasp for things. We go back to certain habits. Some of them could be good habits even. Good habits can become replacements for God. Good habits can be golden calves. So can bad habits. Our concern of what people think of us. What other people think of us can bring a measure of security and comfort. We can put too much emphasis on that. That can be a golden calf. What are we grasping for to make us feel better? Shopping therapy, chocolate therapy, which I think is okay if it's dark chocolate in moderation. Sometimes you find too, it's not a conscious thought. It's not like we think, oh gee, it just dawned on me, I'm feeling a little uncertain, I should latch onto something physical and tangible. We don't consciously think that. It's an inner compulsion. We're driven to reach for something in our insecurity, and we're hoping that it will satisfy, even though experience tells us that it generally never does. Wait on God. Our culture hates to wait. We get irritated when we have to wait. Waiting for a phone call. Waiting at the emergency room. Waiting for YouTube to load. How many of us have sworn at those stupid ads? Huh? Quick and efficient has become a modern-day entitlement. Many of our problems are attached to the difficulty that we have trusting God and waiting. But that is a major part of the Exodus story, and really, it's an important part of our stories too, learning to wait. We wait on a God who says, just a little while longer. And often we find that we're waiting in the midst of some pretty challenging circumstances. The waiting can often be very hard. Think of our friend Christine right now in the hospital fighting cancer, waiting. The challenge of being patient, hoping for healing, experiencing pain and setback, but hoping for healing, the waiting. That's a challenge. Years ago when Christy's back was so bad, and one night it was one of those big revelation light bulb moments for me, but it was a day where Christy was feeling quite discouraged. The pain was quite bad that day, and in her pain she expressed that the hardest thing for her was the not knowing if and when the pain would end. Like honestly, if someone could tell me, that the pain will be done in a month, if I knew it was only one more month, I could suck it up, I could endure. But I don't know if it's a month or another year. I don't know how long. And when you don't know, you don't know. In the midst of our pain, small satisfactions like a blankie, like a stuffy, like some expression of comfort, some golden calf, can feel better than what might seem like endless waiting. And it's a common theme. David in the Psalms, how long, O Lord, will you forget us forever? Well, God hasn't forgot us forever, but sometimes it sure feels like it. And I think that's where we can look back and see this really special truth in the Exodus story, because right after their impatience, they get impatient, they're grasping the golden calf. The very next part of the story shows us that God has actually been up to some really significant stuff. Part of the reason Moses has been up on that mountain for 40 days is because he's been busy taking notes. God is giving him very detailed instructions on how to build the tabernacle. Very detailed instructions, precise measurements, exactly what it should look like, exactly what materials to build it out of. And Moses is taking notes like crazy. This project is taking 40 days. God has been at work. He's been busy. He's been busy all along. So the people are freaking out. Where is Moses? Where is God? Why don't we know anything? That's the place they're in. Meanwhile, God is busy at work doing this really special thing. And why the tabernacle? What was behind that? The tabernacle was the place where God would once again dwell in the midst of his people. The people are freaking out. Where are you, God? And God is working on a very specific plan to come as close to them as he can. If they could have seen that, if they could have had patience to wait for it. While the people were waiting, God was actively pursuing an agenda of restoration and connection. He was pursuing life. He was pursuing his presence in their midst in a deeper way. How often do we daily miss God's heart to be with us, to comfort us with his presence? You know, think of Jesus and the 12. When Jesus tries to tell them that he needs to head back to heaven, they start to panic. Jesus, you can't leave. Where are you going? You can't leave us alone. And he's like, hey guys, relax. It's okay. I'm not leaving for good. But I have to go. I have work to do. Why do I have to go? I'm going to prepare a permanent home for you. I'm working on this thing so that you can be with me forever. I need to go. I've got work to do so that you can be with me forever. But don't worry, I have a surprise. I have a gift. I'm going to send my presence, the gift of the Holy Spirit, to be in your hearts forever. A security blanket that you can never lose because my presence will inhabit your whole being. Cool, huh? Especially if we could remember that promise, which we often forget. Where is God? Well, God was busy back then with Moses, and God is busy now. He's preparing, he's building. We sang it this morning, new wine. He's making new wine. When we don't see what he's doing new stuff for us. Sometimes we use, this little saying, Aslan is on the move. Aslan is on the move. God is on the move. We maybe don't see what he's doing, but he's working on our behalf. Yeah, okay. But waiting is so hard. Where is God? We grasp for some comfort, a dopamine rush that can temporarily distract us, give us a temporary sense of control. It's a golden calf taste of Egypt's old securities. It's not surprising that we grasp after other things, other comforts, no matter how fleeting, when we lose our sense of God being close. We are trying to find something, to see something solid that can assure us. We should be able to relate to the Israelites as they grasp for a measure of comfort and some sense of control. And the irony then really is the irony now. While the Israelites were desperately crafting their substitute God presence, God was busy making plans to be more present with them than ever. So when we are grasping after other things to bring us comfort and security, God is often trying to get our attention so that he can draw closer to us. And that, these things that we cling on to, the comfort of Egypt, it is confusing. Egypt itself started out as a safe place. It started out as a good place. It's what saved them from famine. But it eventually became a prison. And our idols and unhealthy attachments often start out the same way, with a good desire. It's a good thing. We reach onto something that it's healthy. Exercise can be a very healthy thing, but if you become too attached to it, it can be unhealthy. Good desires can get twisted, and God's original design can get distorted to the point that we lose sight or forget the original plan. In God's seeming absence, we forget that we are God's treasured possession. We forget that God has been busy redeeming and restoring. Sometimes our memories fail us and convince us that we can conjure up our own security. But the slavery of our own little Egypts erodes our God-given dignity. They erode hope, and they cause us to forget God's loving pursuit. We get duped by self-sabotage. We chase these things that bring us comfort, and they do for a short time. And then they're not comfortable anymore. They're just a distraction. And then they're an empty distraction. And then we realize how much time we're wasting on them. And then we realize that while we've been committing so much time and effort to them, we've drifted from God, we've drifted from family, we've gone to a really unhealthy place. How did that happen? We turn to idols and attachments that go against God's good plans for us, and it damages our souls. Forgetting God's loving pursuit, we fall for the lie of rejection. Henry Nouwen makes this observation. He says, the real trap, however, is self-rejection. As soon as I am rejected, left alone or abandoned, I find myself thinking, well, that proves once again that I am a nobody. My dark side says, I am no good. I deserve to be pushed aside, forgotten, rejected, and abandoned. Self-rejection is the greatest enemy of the spiritual life because it contradicts the sacred voice that calls us the beloved. Being the beloved constitutes the core truth of our existence. Can we see that we are the beloved? Can we believe that? Can we allow ourselves to feel beloved? On that camping trip at the base of Mount Sinai in those 40 days and nights, Israel forgot the love that initiated their rescue in the first place. They forgot they were God's beloved. And in the forgetting, it was eating away at them. We often forget it too, and it eats away at us. Substitutes, golden calves, temporary comfort, magic bullets. They look nice and shiny at first, but their greatest damage is done in time, slowly rotting us from the inside out. And it's part of our humanity. We are wired for the fight or flight response. It's in our DNA. On one hand, we are programmed to self-protect. And it is often difficult to fight this urge, to control, to react, to protect, rather than to risk, to trust, to believe. The Israelites were doing what comes naturally to us all, attempting to bring some order into their perceived chaos. This is why we need to taste and experience God's love. We need to grow in recognizing ourselves as God's beloved until this truth becomes second nature, until it becomes automatic. When you look in the bathroom mirror, the first thought that should pop into your head is not, oh no, my receding hairline. It should be, I am God's beloved. We need to recognize God's relentless pursuit of us. We did this as a playful little exercise a few weeks ago, but the Apostle John, he got to the place where he saw himself as God's beloved. He could say with boldness and humility, he was bold and humble at the same time. He could say, I am the disciple that Jesus loved. I think we need to say that more often. Put your name in that statement. You are the disciple that Jesus loved. We need to say that to one another. John had learned to personally own this truth, and we need to also. Part of the story of the Israelites in the wilderness, part of the story of our own wilderness experiences is that in the midst of uncertainty, God continues to reach out with relentless love and grace. In the midst of their wilderness journey, their uncertainty, there was something that they were learning. The God of compassion and mercy, they were learning that God is a God of compassion and mercy. He is slow to anger and filled with unfailing love and faithfulness. I lavish unfailing love to 1,000 generations. I forgive iniquity, rebellion, and sin. When this was declared, Moses immediately threw himself to the ground and worshiped. Like, what other response can you have to such an amazing gift? And his response was, Lord, please travel with us. This is so good. This is so good. We need to learn this. Please travel with us. We are a stubborn and rebellious people, but please forgive our iniquity and sins. Claim us as your own special possession. Help us to see that we are beloved. This is God's true character. Merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in love and faithfulness. Just think on that truth. It's amazing because it should catch us off guard. It should stand out as unusual, both because it doesn't seem to fit what we often experience in our everyday lives, but it's often not the understanding that people have of the God of the Bible. People that don't really know God, this grumpy old white-haired guy that can't wait to punish us. That is their idea. Where does that come from? It comes from human brokenness. It's part of our nature. We think that God is this mean, grumpy guy. And some of that idea is still in us. But he's a God of compassion and mercy. We find ourselves in the experience of the Israelites. I don't remember who I heard say it, but somebody made the comment one day, and it's a catchy little phrase, so maybe you remember this, but it took one day for God to get the Israelites out of Egypt. It took him 40 years to get Egypt out of them before they got to the promised land. One day to get them out of Egypt, 40 years to get Egypt out of them. 40 years for them to learn that they were beloved. 40 years for them to see a God of compassion and mercy. Our ongoing battle with golden calves, temporary comforts, it reminds us that we are continually seeking a kind of satisfaction that we want to try and bottle up and control. We're not fond of letting go, of surrendering, or of embracing a new way that is out of our control. But God continues to pursue us on this wilderness journey with a love that strips away our old selves and energizes our new, better selves. So I think that maybe today, in a fresh way, individually and together, we need to ask for the grace to help us relax. Grace to help us hand over control to this God who pursues. Grace to see that we are beloved. Grace to help us receive the love and comfort that God wants to give us. So I just want to finish with communion. Maybe I can get a volunteer here. We're still using our COVID communion stuff. I don't know if you got a volunteer. Yes, no, maybe so. Kathy will pass it around. Thank you, Kathy. So just a reminder that the little wafer things are in the lid of your communion element on top of the juice. But we're just going to finish with communion, and it's a chance again to take something that is physical that will help bring the past promise and make it real in our present. So think of this past promise. Think of the past promise, the rescue of the Exodus, the past promise of a God that wants to come close, the past promise of a God that wants us to know that we are beloved. And in communion, this promise can become real in the present. Waiting can be difficult, but in time, His love and comfort can really be more real. So Jesus, we are sitting in your presence this morning. And Lord, once again, we need to be reminded that we are your beloved. We need to be reminded that your heart is for us. And Jesus, even though we might feel like there are certain answers that we're waiting for, even though we might feel that there is an uncertainty in certain areas of life, that things aren't clear and we're waiting for clarity. And Lord, we don't know what's going on. We don't know where Moses is. We don't know where you are. We can trust, Lord, that behind the scenes you really are at work on our behalf. You are working to draw close to us in new ways and better ways. Your heart is trying to get as close to us as you can. And Lord, even though we might not be able to see it clearly in our present circumstances, we can believe that that is true, and we can reach for it. And Jesus, I pray that as we take communion this morning, this bread that represents your body that was broken for us, and as we take the juice that represents your blood that was shed for us, I pray, Lord, that just in this participation, that promise would become new to us in a more tangible way, in a new way, in a special way, that our hearts would feel renewed, that we would feel encouraged, that we would feel inspired, that we would be motivated to pursue you, to draw close to you, that we would be motivated to share your love and care with other people, the other people that you've brought into our lives. Lord, we are your beloved. We are the disciples that you love. I pray that would resonate in our hearts in a new and special way this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.